We are so excited today to have Dr. Kalei Kanuha join us to talk about this beautiful book, Nānā Kumu. So before we get started, I just wanted to introduce Compassionate Ko'olapoko, and then my amazing colleague, Kumu Bella, is going to introduce Dr. Kanuha a little bit more to you. So we are Compassionate Ko'olapoko, a collaborative initiative founded by the partners representing the Castle, Kailua, and Kalei complexes of the Hawaii Department of Education, Windward Community College, and the Harold KL Foundation. The Compassionate Ko'olapoko Steering Committee began meeting during the fall of 2019 with a shared purpose of helping Ko'olapoko become trauma-informed and better able to support youth and our families. Guided by the wisdom of our kupuna, community leaders, families, and educators, Compassionate Ko'olapoko's mission is to strengthen a culture of care. In other words, we aim to cultivate a flourishing, thriving Ko'olapoko where the youth and their families are resilient and compassionate so that they can take care of themselves and others. We accomplish this by ensuring our school communities are trauma-informed and responsive. This event is funded through the generous support from the Novo Foundation, Education First, and the Rockefeller Foundation, as well as the Nale Aloha Foundation, all of whom we send a heartfelt mahalo. Bella, you want to? Oh, go ahead.
Mahalo, Gail. Thank you so much. Yes, once again, mahalo nui for joining us. So really, I know Dr. Kalei Kanuha, you know, she needs no introduction. I know, but I would love to introduce her. And before I do though, I do just want to say mahalo to Native Books, so nativebookshawaii.org. If you did not get one of the books that was sent, we had I think 100 for, those of you that got to register for the book, it was sent out to most of you. But if you didn't get a chance to get one from us, Native Books is still allowing a discount for their book. So if you wanted to until tomorrow, they're giving a 15% discount, and the code I'll put in the chat later is Helu ʻEkolu Talk Story. So Helu ʻEkolu Talk Story, if you go to nativebookshawaii.org, and you can get your book with a 15% discount. And tonight, this evening, this afternoon, we have Dr. Kalei Kanuha with us, one of the authors. And so she was born in Hilo in the 1950s. Her father is Kanaka Oiwi, her mother is Nisei. And as I was reading about Dr. Kanuha, it's a beautiful mo'olelo because she considers herself indigenous, critical feminist, definitely an activist, practitioner, and scholar. And for more than 50 years, her practice and research have been dedicated to analyzing the impacts of colonization, racism, masculinity on gender violence in Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and LGBTQ, Mahu, and communities of color of all kinds. Her interests focus on alternative justice interventions aimed at really healing instead of punishment, restoration instead of abandonment. Currently, I believe, Dr. Kanuha, if it's correct, you are still at the University of Washington, is that correct? School of Social Work. And I love this phrase, especially that each and every day, Kalei honors her mother, grandmother, Auntie Malia Craver for their embodiments of aloha. And so I know you're all here to talk story with her and to listen. And so I would like to turn the floor over to Dr. Kanuha. Mahalo for being here with us.
Mahalo, Bella and Gail, for this just a gift of invitation to be with all of you today. Mahalo ke akua, mahalo nau makua, mahalo na kupuna. I am from the island of Hawaii, Moko Keawe, born and raised in Hilo. I acknowledge my Hawaiian family from Kohala, my mother's family from Hyoko Prefecture in Japan, and all of my ancestors from all the different places that they have come from, who have blessed me and allowed me to be here with all of you today and to be part of this precious and sacred project, which is what I consider Nānā Kumu, a precious and sacred project. So, you know, when Gail and Bill and I were talking about this time that we would spend together, I see it as kind of a talk story. I didn't kind of want to talk myself. I wanted to talk story with everybody. So I know it's hard with such a big group like this, but I hope that all of you will feel free to join in and talk story with each other and with me about this work and how you might use it, what it means to you, what parts of it might mean, any questions that you might have about it. And there are many of you there who, out there on this Zoom call who know very, very, very much more than me about some of the practices that we talk about in Nānā Kumu ʻEkolu, Helu ʻEkolu. So I don't know, Gail or Bella, if you folks want to start with asking something or reflecting on something, sharing something, and then maybe that would, get me started on something I can talk about too. So, or anybody else too, if you have something you want to talk about, that's good too. So.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Kanuha. I think one of the things that I was wondering if we could just get started, if you could share a little bit about the process of creating the book.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how many of you out there ever wrote the book, but I never did. But I do know a lot of people who have written books of all kinds, yeah. And I think what was so important about the way Helu ʻEkolu was created, I would say, is that first of all, it took a lot of time. So in the introduction, you'll see that we did say that the beginnings and the idea for this project kind of formally was around 2008, something like that. But in fact, probably the seeds of this project began, I think, in the heart and spirit of Tutupukui, because what I understand from Auntie Lynette and Uncle Richard, and definitely Auntie Malia, is that in their work with Tutupukui, she actually, people would say, like, why did you have a volume 1 and volume 2? And she said, because there will be a volume 3. And I think this is how the idea of it, right, was knowing that this was in the dreams of Tutupukui, that this would be continued. And what would be continued would be our preservation and our honoring and our holding up of our ancient practices. And that he knew even, in the early 70s, when the first 2 volumes of Nānā Kumu first came out, 72 and 79, but they were based on many conversations and many talk stories, consultations that Tutupukui and Dr. Hardegg had with the Queen Liliuokalani Children's Center staff. There are probably hundreds more hours that didn't make it into those 2 volumes and is not reflected in Helu ʻEkolu either. But so the way that this project was started, I always say, was in the heart and spirit of Tutupukui. And what I think is very different about the creation, and I would say that, the book, I wrote the book, but I wrote the book as a reflection of hours, months, years of conversations, of talk story that Auntie Malia, many of the staff of the Queen Liliuokalani Children's Center had with each other, and with Auntie Malia, also with some of the early conversations with Dr. Hardegg and with Tutupukui. And then in more recent years, it was with Uncle Richard and Auntie Lynette Paglinawan. So, and all through this time, of course, was Uncle Dennis and his work, long, many decades of work with the Children's Center. And so there was a legacy that began many decades ago that then followed in the process, which was a set of consultations, really, that the staff would have about Hawaiian families that they were working with. and wanting to know what were some Hawaiian practices that could be melded with Western practices in helping our families to heal, to reconnect again if there was, if there was some kind of oki, some kind of a break that had happened in a family. And so these volumes reflect the stories and the lives and the experiences of our families and our communities. And I think the reason it took so long is because it wasn't just like 1, 2, 3, or 4 people like writing different parts of a book, which is usually how, when you have a lot of authors, everybody kind of writes certain parts and then they trade back and forth. But that's not how this book was done. The book was done as a set of lessons from many, many, many years of conversations and consultations. And that's a very different way of doing something like this. And then the other thing I want to say is, one of the things that Auntie Malia always taught me and taught many of us is that we didn't do this book, we were vessels. We're vessels from Keakua to bring forward and to preserve some of the the messages in this particular volume that I had the honor of working on. It's not that we did this book. The book was a way of reflecting the vessels that we are, delivering and preserving and holding up and being proud of who we are and what we are as Hawaiian people, and the practices that our ancestors, that our kupuna practiced before foreigners came to Hawaii, and that we all have kind of lost some of these practices over the years, but always there's some of you probably out there who also practice many things in this book and other things that are not in this book. And so the book is a representation of, it is a vessel that we help put into it, but that Keakua gave to us to put into the book. And so it's not a creation of any of us, it's a creation and a gift of Keakua to all of us, to remember who we are, to be proud of who we are, and to know that while most of us have experienced and been trained in Western ways, we can still preserve our Hawaiian ways too. And so this book was meant as a gift, I would say, from Keakua to each and every one of us who are Hawaiian, who may not know some of these practices. I didn't know many of them until I had the honor of working with auntie and uncles. And so it's not only for teachers and administrators, social workers. It's the whole idea is that, and this was Tutupukui's idea too, is that it's for us in our families and in our households to practice some of these things. And it's written in a way, hopefully, that everybody can understand how you can use these practices in a job setting. It might be, with your co-workers. For those of you who are teachers, how to help your children who might be struggling in the classroom or at home. But it's also for everybody. I mean, to us, I think, and I think this is one of the things Mele and Manu Meyer said, right? That Nānā Kumu and Ho'oponopono in every Hawaiian home, that this is that all of us would have in each of our homes that we would call on. And then the other thing is it's not only for us to love who we are as Hawaiian people, but it's for those of you who are not Hawaiian, who love Hawaiian people, is for you to learn some of these ways that will help you to help our families and our communities. And so, that's why to me, I consider Nānā Kumu, Helu, ʻEkolu, but also all of the different ways that we are able to study Hawaiian practices. These are sacred practices that are gifts from Keakua and gifts from our ancestors. And it's not for professionals to practice it. It's for each and every one of us to practice in our homes and with our families and in our communities. And for those of you who are not Hawaiian, to practice in a good way with our Hawaiian people, because we're all here to heal, to preserve, to hold up, and to extend aloha to every Hawaiian and to all the generations to come. And that's why I see this this volume as I consider it a sacred text. And it's not because it's something that's so special, but we are special. Hawaiians are special. And this book is one representation of what makes us special, which is our embodiment of aloha. So that's probably more than what you folks wanted to know, but I got plenty more I can say about that. but yeah, so that's how I would open. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Dr. Kanuha. Thank you so much. I do want to let you guys know, like those of you that just joined us, Dr. Kanuha said, you know, she really wanted to be a more talk story kind of session. And so we do want to invite you all to, you can put your questions in the chat. You can unmute yourself if you have like a super burning question right now for her. So she wants to make it interactive. And so please feel free to use the chat, and Gail and I will be monitoring the chat and discussing, oh, here's Auntie Lynette. Okay, Auntie Lynette's in the house. Aloha.
Aloha, Auntie.
Oh, so exciting. All right. So, yeah, so if you do have questions, or if you could definitely, again, unmute yourselves, or go ahead and put it in the chat, and we'll be able to read that out to, or well, I think Dr. Kanuha, you can read it too if you want. But does anybody have any particular questions at the moment? Okay, I don't want to dominate, but may I ask a question? So Dr. Kanuha, can you talk a little bit about, you know, I've been a classroom teacher, and in Hawaii's public education system, things that are kanaka oiwi are like kind of siloed in specific places sometimes. It has not yet permeated all of our Hawaiian education. And so one of the things that Gail and I have the opportunity to do is to talk about that, you know, to bring it to light. I just wanted to know your mana'o about, you know, not just in the content of the book, but in your personal practice, maybe maybe the impacts of trauma, or more perhaps the resilience. I don't know, however you want to, you know, kind of talk about that, and maybe advise those of us that are educators here in Hawaii, you know, how we can approach that.
Mahalo. It's such a big, you know, it's such a big question, such a wonderful question, Bella, especially for all of us who are either professional practitioners, right? That we're either counselors or teachers or social workers, administrators. So there's a couple of things that I would say. One is probably if there are those of you on the call who know some of the, you know, I mean, it's a little bit of the studies and the research now around not only trauma-based, yeah. So there's a lot of talk now about trauma-based therapy, trauma-based interventions, trauma-based programming, and you know, one of the things I think is that this is very good for us to be thinking about that, but one of the things I think that we've lost track of, and this is, I think, part of the Western emphasis on how to deal with trauma, is to talk about trauma-based whatever, right? And I think what we wanted this book to reflect is not only, I mean, there's a whole chapter on historical trauma, and the reason we talk about that, and it's a particular kind of trauma, right? Because I'll just say really quickly, the research on trauma is generally, the Western research on trauma is generally, has two assumptions, right? One is that trauma usually is like, you know, you fall down, you scrape your knee, that's trauma. You get tidal wave, that's trauma. You lose a parent, that's trauma. You have COVID, That's trauma. But trauma in the Western research refers usually to an incident. And it's usually a very traumatic incident, car accident, a death of a family member, a pandemic, no, tidal wave, earthquake. I mean, it has to be something that's very, very destructive. And it could be destructive either in a physical sense, but it could also be destructive in an emotional or spiritual sense, right? And so the idea of remembering and focusing on trauma is that sometimes we don't really attend to how an incident can last over time, right? So trauma-informed practices, again, I'm going to say from the Western model, and I don't know how many people know this, but a lot of the risk and resiliency, and I'm going to talk about that as a thing, risk and resiliency research is based on, from Hurricane Iniki. So plenty research, right, on risk and resilience came from looking at generations of families that survived and thrived after Iniki. So one of the things I think with trauma informed is that it tends to focus, to me as a researcher and a practitioner, more on the trauma side instead of the resiliency side, and in the healing side, and in the calling on the strengths. I mean, we call it protective factors, but even that is like, it's not protective factors so much, and it's not even resilience, but it's something that is embodied in you because of your connection to community and your connection to your history and your ancestors, yeah. And so there's this whole thing about now the popular term is health disparities, right? And Hawaiians are in all those. I always say, all the bad statistics is Hawaiians. Hawaiians have a lot of health disparities, and that means like we're more likely to have mortality, high mortality with cancer. Even though a lot of cancers can be prevented, Hawaiians have a high mortality rate from cancer, heart disease, diabetes. These are all things, teenage pregnancy. So a lot of these health disparities are assigned to Hawaiians, but is also assigned to almost all Native peoples, African Americans, poor people, right? But you see, it has that same thing about like all the negative parts, a negative impact, right, of trauma. And what I think this book is trying to remind us about is the beautiful things that we have in our cultural ways, right? And so for example, the whole chapter on kaumaha, right? The whole way that we deal with grief. One thing about historical trauma is that it's not based on an incident. And this is why historical trauma and cultural trauma is really different than most of the Western ways of talking about trauma. Because for me, as a Hawaiian, and for someone who's worked a lot with communities that have to deal with racism and poverty and so many disparities, yeah, in their access to justice and their access to good health care and to housing and to food, that this is not an incident. This is something that goes back generations and generations and generations. And so what I feel Nānā Kumu is offering to us is a memory, a remembrance, a spiritual connection to who our people have been and have always been since time immemorial. And so what I think the book says is, yes, we have experienced historical trauma, but we're still here. And we're not only still here, we're thriving. We're taking care of the land again. We're learning our ʻEkolu again. And so sometimes when we focus on trauma, it focuses on the negative. Even though we have research on risk and resilience, trauma, that word it activates a sense of trauma, right? When we hear trauma, it kind of like generates and activates that feeling of hurt, harm, pain, depression, sadness. And what I think this book is about aloha. And I believe that the healing of things that have been historically taken from us, and including the land, our access to the oceans, fishing, hunting, planting, having our own food sources, the trauma of the loss of those parts of our culture, starting with our language, has long-term effects. And the long-term effects went on from generations to us, all of us now, and will go on for generations to come unless we reclaim a sense of connection to our spiritual and our ancient ways. And to me, the most important practice in that is a sense of aloha. And to me, aloha is really not the kind Hawaii Visitors Bureau kind, aloha, aloha. It's really about a sense of a love of humanity, a love of each and every creature, a love of each and every object, a love of things seen and unseen, a remembrance every day about the kupuna who have come before us and all of our ancestors that we don't know, a remembrance and learning about our aumakua. And to me, it is also about a remembrance of past, present, and future. And I think Nānā Kumu, from the first 2 volumes to today, is to remind us that we are just here for such a very short time in the eternity of life and in the cosmos, yeah? And so what I have learned and what I now live with, because of the experience I've had to be with Auntie Malia, Auntie Lynette, Uncle Richard, and Uncle Dennis, is that at the same time, each and every day, and even in this moment right now with all of you, what we remember is our past, which is honoring our ancestors, our present, that we are all here together, and in our future. And so all the generations that we will not know, everything we do today is to make a better world for them, is to preserve for them these practices that some of us are just learning today, so that our generations to come, who will not know us in a way that we won't know them, but they'll know us by our spirit, and they'll know us by the preservation of these practices. So to me, what I want us to focus on is aloha, is community, is ohana, all of the things, that are in this book, some of the guiding principles about, one of the beautiful things, and Auntie, I would invite you to talk about form and essence, right? That a lot of us, we got the form, we know how to do certain things, but no more the spirit inside. And this is one of, I would say this is one of the most important parts of this book of Helu ʻEkolu, is the notion of form and essence. And that is from Auntie Lynette. So those are some of the things that I think about what this book is offering us, which is to hold up, to love ourselves as Hawaiian people, and to love all the generations who made a place for us. I'm here today because my ancestors brought me home. It was not my idea to come home to Hawaii, but they called me home, and I didn't know why that was, right? And sometimes, when I think about the honor I had of working on this book, I just couldn't believe, why did Auntie Malia ask me to do this, for 15 or 20 years? And I keep saying, why me? There's so many other people who could do this. But I think Auntie did it for me. She created this opportunity for me. And so I feel like I need to create this opportunity for everybody else. And this book is the way for everybody to be called back to that which we love, which is who we are as Hawaiians. So, mahalo.
So now that I'm in tears, that's I'm so touched by that. Mahalo nui. Okay, I see some hands going up. All right. So it came up simultaneously. So if I can, Hannah, you want to go first, and then Kamuela. Oh wait, where did Hannah's hand go? Okay.
I can go
Maybe
second.
Okay.
Mahalo.
Okay. Mahalo, Hannah. Okay, Kamuela. You makau. Okay. Mahalo. Okay, you muted, but okay, there you go.
Okay,
Okay.
can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, aloha, and thank you guys for putting this on. And thank you, Dr. Kanuha. My question is, so I didn't read this volume, but I remember reading, I don't know if it was in the first one or the second one, and what hit me profoundly was how Auntie talked about shame in our culture and what a powerful force it was. For me, today, as a cultural and natural resource preservation manager trying to help our society move towards that, I've thought a lot about maybe some of the mechanisms that our kupuna had to use to keep the society in check, because we manage our resources by not being greedy. And one thing I thought about was, if shame was a tool in our culture meant for the greater good, but at some point in time, shame became non-productive to us, but we still do it to one another today. I'm wondering if this version continues the conversation about shame.
Mahalo, Kamuela. That's such a again, such a deep question. So this is what I would say. It's interesting you asked that. I mean, all things for a purpose, yeah, Kamuela. But I was just reading this article last night about the difference between shame and guilt. And so there's actually, this is what I think is the difference, what I think about it. I think shame is, as you said, is a social context, yeah? So it's like, you're not shame dressing like that. And it's about how you are presenting and being in I wouldn't say in public, yeah, but it's in your relationships, right? So that idea of shame has been used quite a lot. I'll tell you a story later on, but anyway, but it is kind of, I would say, almost an organic thing. I think it might be a human thing, to your shame. However, the difference with guilt, and I would say that guilt is something that came from Western religion. And the concept of guilt is really from Western religion. It's not in most indigenous cultures. Almost all cultures, before they are colonized, use shame as a social control, yeah, and a teaching method, because it's about in community. Guilt, however, is an internal process, right? So it's kind of like, they're guilt tripping me. You don't say guilt tripping me in front of everybody. Guilt is an internal process, because the way that Western religion thinks about guilt is it's something that's inside of you. So like, don't you feel guilty about what you did? That's about you talking inside yourself about what it means to you. Whereas shame is something about how you're going to communicate and be accountable and have kuleana for everybody else and you too. Guilt is about what you're going to do about it in yourself, right? So, that's why I think one of the things that I think is really interesting, and I again, Auntie, please join in. One of the things I think is interesting about, restorative justice, ho'oponopono, all of these alternatives to punishment, is the idea that, being accountable for what you've done to hurt somebody is not because you should feel guilty, but being accountable is how you bring back a sense of connection. You make the ho'oponopono to make things right, not necessarily only in yourself, but make things right in community, with others, with your family, with your children, with your neighbors, yeah? And so I think that's why shame is actually a very powerful mechanism. But when shame turns into guilt, that's when I think it's a problem. And I believe that the use of guilt is a modern concept that came from colonization. Because if you look at some of our old and our ancient teachings, like even some of our stories, yeah, it has a shame aspect to it, but it doesn't have a guilt aspect to it. It's not you're bad, you're going to go hell, you did something so terrible, we never going to forgive you. With shame, it's something that can always be healed. It can always be made right again, because it's something that belongs to us together. And I think that's why Ho'oponopono is such a powerful healing force, because it's not about forgiving, it's about making things right. It's being accountable, about saying, sorry, yeah, but it's not about getting forgiveness. I mean, that's not for us, any of us to give, right? So I'm really appreciate that question, Camilla, because I thought a lot about that too. And it's the difference between a community approach and a singular individual approach, right? And guilt is individual, shame is community. And I feel like always with shame, you can make things right. Guilt, a little bit harder, because of how we've been taught what guilt means. And I think that's why guilt is a very powerful controller, because how you can make things right? It's just something about you, and sometimes you're just born like that something's wrong with you. But that's not how shame is. Shame is something that can be fixed, can be made right again. Then you can be made whole again. It's not true that if, it's like you're going to go to jail forever. It's like, then you feel like you cannot ever make amends. You cannot make things right. You're going to have to live with that the rest of your life. That instills a sense of guilt, because it's a sense of powerlessness and a sense of disconnection, a sense of being lost and being on your own. And that's not how Hawaiians are not like that. We don't, that was not our way, and we shouldn't be doing that again. We don't need to be like that. Aloha is not about guilting people, right? Aloha is about connecting in love and caring about each other. No matter how much harm, aloha means we will always find a way to healing. And that's why I love being a Hawaiian, because it's so hopeful, and it should always be hopeful, loving each other and our people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, can we have Hannah, you ready? And then after Hannah, Nani Faye.
Sure. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I just kind of had a reflection. I've been thinking a lot the last 2 days about duality, especially with yesterday and the eruption and the duality between the fire and ice and Pele and Poliahu and it being La Kuakoa. And I just been reflecting on how there can be two sides and there has to be balance between the two. And I think that example just talked about the differences between shame and guilt. And then also the references earlier to trauma as a single event. And what's the flip side of that? It would be resilience and hope. And my experience in the public school system here with my kids, teachers and the school support, there's so much hope given to these kids and messages of resilience. And so I think that is like the flip side of the trauma-informed learning. Like, yes, trauma did happen. We can overcome. Maybe it's a collective guilting of something to a child, and maybe helping to see that there are steps to take individually. Maybe it is shame and it's been transformed and twisted, but looking at the duality of things and how there can be a balance where there's not, and maybe with things being siloed in certain areas of the school system. What is the opposite of that? And I don't really have a question. I've just been thinking a lot about those things. That's all. Thank you.
Mahalo, Hannah. And mahalo for taking care of our kekia. I mean, we just don't value our educators as much as we should, and we don't appreciate the daily work that you do to care for our children, all those hours of the day. And especially through COVID, we thank you so much for what you've done to care for our children. And after coming out of COVID, all the kids coming back to school, all of you are the true warriors and heroes, to me at least, and to many of us. And, I think that idea, right, of balance, I mean, that's lokahi, right? And I think the idea of lokahi is such an important part, because I think, as you say, with trauma can come healing, right? If you've done wrong to somebody, it can be made right again. And so there's this sense of belief in wholeness, right? And that was what lokahi is. Lokahi is wholeness. It is the balance of the yin and the yang, right? The harm and the healing, the hurt and the love. And, one of the things that we used to do in Aloha Robin, one of the things that we used to do, I had a Hawaiian cultural domestic violence program, and it was on Hawaii Island. And one of the things we used to do is we used to talk a lot about, Pele and Hi'iaka. And literally, like, we would go, up to Kilauea Iki, and then Hale Maumau, and we would go down inside the crater, yeah. And we'd say, like, look at all of this lava, right? So black and dark. But no matter how much destruction the lava brings, always, eventually, the little shoots come up, right? So with that destruction, always comes new life. Always, always, always. And to me, I think to live in a place that's so dynamic, in like Hawaii, right, the only active volcano on the entire Earth, we see this every day, that with destruction comes new life. And this, to me, is the metaphor of just what you're talking about, Hannah, which is that there is a duality. But the duality, sometimes we don't remember, that with bad experiences or harm or hurting people, I mean, that we it's not going to help any of us to stay in those places. And that this chapter on kamaha, when we talk about grief, that always at the end of grief is a healing. And from grief comes wellness and comes new things, right? And so we don't stay in grief forever. That's not who Hawaiians are. We acknowledge grief still. That's the other thing, because many cultures, like, they say, oh, don't talk about that. The person died already, or don't talk about that. That happened a long time ago. We should not be afraid of that. We talk about things that were really hurtful and destructive, but we do because we know that on the other side of that is going to come goodness and healing and light again, and love, always love. And so I think the idea of duality is so important, but especially in Hawaii, because it's right before us every single day. And I think, Pele is reminding us of that. I think we're in a hard time all over the world, and especially in the United States, where there's so much negativity right now. And I think maybe Pele is here to remind us that after all these years, Mauna Loa is speaking to us and reminding us that maybe we have to, we have to have some kind of dramatic remembrance of how we should be with each other, to care for each other again. And I think this volume, I hope will provide that kind of hope giving, because I think it really does.
Mahalo.
All right, and I believe Yeah, like we reset. Absolutely, Nānā. All right, yeah. So Nanife, is that, yeah? Do you have a question?
Aloha Nanife.
Anake, you gotta unmute yourself. Oh, she not unmuting. Okay.
Sorry.
There we
Hi,
go.
I so admire you. I wanted to say I love you, love you, love you.
Aloha, Kalei.
And I want to
Eh,
support
Aloha.
with the shame versus guilt. You know, I was raised in shame and guilt combined together
Yeah.
all of my life.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I've been in 3 healing circles with Auntie Pulani Burgess from Waianae.
Yes.
I'm dealing with Hawaiians and women of color in the circles and dealing with that. And she came up with lifelong journey. I used to say lifelong learning, but it's lifelong journey. And you know, she used the va'a as a metaphor. So I no longer say learning, I say journey. Even at my age, and in this group of women, I'm the oldest, and the youngest is about in their 50s. So we all in our huliao part of our life, going through changes. She says, so what you gonna put in your va'a? And she was speaking pidgin, it threw us all off. So where you going? Where you been stay? And it was like, what? You know, it wasn't how are you? How do you feel? And so we all were kind of taken back. And of course, we're all social workers. And then what are you going to put in your va'a? What do you have to take out? And I'm in my stage of life. I'm starting to, well, I did, because after this one particular healing, I did all my funeral arrangements. I did all my, called an attorney. I own nothing. I absolutely am zero, penniless. And my daughter says, Ma, I'm dumping you on a road. No,
Yeah.
I'm living with her now, she and her husband and the 3 mo'opunas. So I moved from Maui after 44 years and I'm living in Kahalu'u now. But I really, and the hardest part for me all these years has been to get rid of the guilt. The guilt has been so, like you said, and I'm still, well, I'm much better at it now. I can talk about it without even getting angry. Because like, you know, because I've shared my story, I was born and raised in abuse all the way from the time I was born. My father was horrifically abusive to my mother. And to work on that part of hating or not to be in denial, I always, and I say it now from over and over, you got to start with yourself first. You cannot go out and save somebody else. I always start with Nanife. So Nanife, where are you? What's happening? And the healing process, I've learned to embrace it. I take the healing as something positive. And the grieving is important. You need to grieve so you can get it out. And one of the, I learned that from all the different therapies and conferences for all the years of working with women, helping women. And working with this Afro-American woman from Chicago, Norwegian woman, and a Korean woman. The 2 conferences I learned from there was tearing, and some say exhaling, some say breathing out. For me, it had to be yawning because I needed to get so much out of my system. But it's 2 physical ways of emotional release. So I can do it every day as I'm driving the car. Here I am, what's happening? I no longer do road rage. I was one of those tuntatillas, okay? I'm not bragging, but I was there. If somebody wants to get smart, I don't know. I know how to be angry and I know how to be abusive. raised where I came from, no, I can punch. I'll take anybody on, but I'm not in that space anymore. So I really appreciate Kalei, what, you know, you're validating a lot of what I'm working on at 78 years old. And I told my daughter asked me the other day, Ma, when is it going to end? I said, it ends when I maki die dead. I want to keep growing and healing so I can heal myself, my ancestors, and heal my children. So I'm healing myself as I come here. Just looking at your face, I'm just healing. So I really, really appreciate. And I don't want to take over, but I want to tell one story because it's a horrific story, but it's understanding what the trauma is. I remember, sorry, Loke, you got to hear it again. But I was about 20, 21 years old. I went to visit my grandmother who was living in Laie. This was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She never locked the door. You know, in that area, you don't lock the door, you just walk in. And she was sitting on the kitchen table with this particular uncle. I don't want to mention his name because it's, you know, some people still keep the secret, but they were talking pure Hawaiian. And I just was looking because I had no clue. My grandmother never spoke Hawaiian to us. Like little words, pow, pow, go cow, cow, go ow, ow, you know, stuff like that. And I said, Grandma. And the two of them, now this is what trauma, I mean, this year, I had to learn this. I didn't have the word trauma in my head or even abuse. I didn't know what abuse was. You just got licking, that's all. I had to learn that later on in my life. But they both started to shake. And they were, like I said, about my age. They were in their 70s. And even Uncle was shaking and he started to cry. And I thought, oh my gosh, I walked in on them having an affair. I said, I'm getting out of here. And they said, no, 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 come, girlie, come, sit down, sit down. And Uncle, after he kind of calmed himself down and he wiped away the tears, and they shared the story that they didn't even share with their children. My mother and her siblings had no clue. When he was like about 7 or 8 years old, they all spoke Hawaiian in their household. Well, the military came in, grabbed his mother with all the kids there, grabbed her by her hair, punched her out, dragged her outside, and this, well, he's a grown man now, and he never shared this with anybody. Why with me? I don't know, but that was the beginning of my healing. So this little boy ran outside, you know, to try to see how he can help his mother. And when he went outside, he saw his father tied up on a pole, beaten, and his grandfather was hanging from the tree. Talk about trauma, this 7-year-old boy who's 78. And over the years, then I could understand why my family chose secrecy. Nobody to talk about it. Don't even mention. The fear is so intense. And that was the beginning of me learning how to heal, to understand why I came from such a dysfunctional family. And that's what it looked like in my family. I had to own that first. And then to take a look at myself from the very white side of me, no matter how fair I am and my green eyes, the nuns I went to school with still called me a savage. And I'm sharing this because that's my reality. And I still have other siblings and one that deny that. And how Christianity played a role in all of that. And in Christianity, the part of the Catholicism, my other reality was being that I was the oldest daughter of 14 children. I was the second mother. You know, that's how the roles go. If you're the oldest daughter, then you take care. My brother didn't have to take care of the kids and cook. I was the oldest daughter. Anyway, I did my genealogy in a very British part of me, the white part of me. I could go back to the 12th century. And my history shows that in that line, going back, That's where the F word was created. I know some of you may know what that story was, but when the girl got her period, she needed to get married. And the lords of that time picked who you got married from. However, you couldn't have sex until you had sex with the lords first. Fornication under the consent of the king. So you have a girl that gets her period at 9, 10, 13, 14. She had to have sex with about 7 elderly adults. That's rape. F-U-C-K. I stopped swearing once I learned that. I never swore after that. And then on the Portuguese side of me, I went back to the 16th century. It was the bishops that was in charge of the government. And my history showed that my great-great-grandmother put my great-grandmother, their daughter, 15-year-old pregnant on a ship. And I said, who would do that at that time? That was the time of slavery. Slavery boats, they didn't have cruise boats. And that's when the whole world was trying to conquer the world. From the Spanish to the Portuguese to the whichever. Anyway, they put her on this boat. And it just so happened that this Mr. Correa took care of her. And this boat stopped off in Hawaii and they both got off. And you know, somehow they made the right decision because here I am and I have grandchildren. But it was that if a girl had sex, she was stoned to death. It doesn't matter if she was raped. The guy could get away with it. So that's 2 stories of my reality. And the Hawaiian part of me is the colonization, what you guys all know. But I needed to know all of who I was so I could heal from all parts of me, not only from just the Hawaiian part. Because the very haole part of me was, he wasn't only a racist, he married my Hawaiian grandmother so he could get land. And in my research, he beat her up. I went in and researched all the hospitals on Oahu, and she was in the hospital about 7 times. And my aunts, my mother's aunts, when I went to ask them, what was it like growing up? It was Nanife, things are better left unsaid. Nanife, don't ask questions. But I got one auntie that had talked to me. And she said, Nanife, if you tell anybody I told you, I'm going to tell them that you're a damn liar. But she told me stories. And that's when I went and did research in hospitals, in doctor's office. And at that time, they didn't have a car to take my great-great-grandmother to the hospital. It was all horse and buggy. And
thank
okay,
you so much, Auntie.
on and on.
Yeah, thank you
But
so much.
Understand where that generation trauma that you're coming from. You got to know where you're going to start from. I'm not
Absolutely.
even angry at that. And I believe that my white great-great-grandfather sexually molested his own daughters. They fit the whole syndrome of what everybody, whoever went to school and they fit it. My whole family fits that whole syndrome.
We're so grateful for your voice, Auntie. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us.
No, I appreciate it, but I've learned, people say that they learn from what I'm saying because they can understand why Hawaiians oppress themselves.
Yeah.
And
So
every
much
day
to
I say,
gain.
Nanife, how are you being sexist to yourself? How are you colonizing yourself?
Yeah.
And then just rethink. And if I
Auntie.
offended anybody, ʻEkolu.
We
But
so
thank you,
appreciate your voice.
Kalei,
So
for
appreciate
letting me share this. And like I said, I so support what you're saying.
Mahalo, mahalo, Nanife. Auntie Lynette,
Yeah, Auntie
so good to
Lynette.
have you.
Oh, I learned from
Yeah.
her too. She was a teacher of mine.
You know, there's a principle. Know thyself. So you can begin to uncover those incidents that are secrets that confuse us today because we don't know about it. Yeah. And part of the healing, when you know yourself more, is what you're going to do about it. You know, Tutupukui says, you can recall that memory, you can feel the hurt, but don't accept what somebody else did. Let it go. Yeah. And if there's someone living today that tells you this is part of your history, it's at the negative part of the history. If you've already handled it, you tell them, stop. Don't dig up the shit. It's time to let it go. And that lesson I learned from my grandfather. When a kahuna Nānā was sending the ʻEkolu to kill him, he faced it head on. Alomakawai, he faced it. And then in Hawaiian, he said, "Uoki, stop. Ho'i no I kou kahu e ai, go back to your keeper and kill." We don't have to kill today, but we can say, I don't accept what you say. I return it back to you. Yeah. So sometimes other people repeat incidences, and if you haven't thoroughly let it go, it dredges up the negative feelings from before. So Tutu says, don't accept it. Send it back to them. Uoki. So because we know ourselves better, we have to look at ways that we don't allow the re-traumatization. There are protective measures that Hawaiians had, and we gotta get back to those protective measures. So that's my mana'o. Nice to see you, Nani Frey.
Lynette, you're so wonderful. You are part of my healing, and Uncle Richard is a part of my healing. So mahalo.
Hi.
All right, Auntie Lynette, since you're here, I know, I know we're putting you on the spot, but is there anything that you specifically want to share about? You know, we invited Dr. Kanuha to talk about the puke. You know,
Yes.
yeah, and so I don't know if you have any, you know, mana'o you'd like to share about that, or anything else you want to advise us or share with us this afternoon.
Nānā Kumu Volume 3 is a book of resiliency and hope. It doesn't mean just because you're using aspects of it that the healing is done. That book alerts us to a much longer process of getting to know yourself and the triggers you have in yourself, and getting back to spirituality, getting back to the Aina, getting reconnected with family, and returning pono and aloha into your relationships is really the key. It has to begin with you making the determination from the Ike Kupuna ancestral wisdom, how you're going to incorporate it in your daily living. As you begin to be aware, learn those tools that Hawaiians had, so that they don't just examine the eha, but they need the handles, the cultural tools to help themselves to stop it. In 66, and I got my MSW, I held that up and I said, my Japanese side gave me this degree. Little did I realize that was trauma. And I had been denying, oh, I'm not traumatized. I can get along in this Western world. But when I personally uttered the words, I realized, yeah. So for me, my journey under the mentorship of Mary Kavenapuku'e, knowing Auntie Malia, a dear, dear friend, and having a partner, Likeke Paglinawan, we made the decision we're going to raise our family with Lua as a way of life and Ho'oponopono as a way of life. And that journey has changed us. Like Nanife says, it's an evolution of change and recognition, dealing with it, and then saying, getting out of your system. But Nanife, we gotta throw the shit back to them. No more. That is what the book is all about. It's a roadmap. But don't expect it
take a look at the book.
to have it take place in a short time. It's living it. And as you live it, you teach your children how to deal with it with aloha and pono. That's my mana'o.
Mahalo, Anake. Thank you so much for joining us today and then just sharing a little bit. So guys, we have, Bill, we're done at 4:30, is that correct? Okay, so we do have a few more minutes. I don't know if there's other burning questions. It's about 4:11. So before, as we wrap up today, and then we do have, again, people in the chat saying mahalo nui, again, for all of this ike. The recording of this will be up online following today's session. So if you missed it or if you want to watch it again, it'll be available on our Compassionate Ko'olau website. So I just want to turn it over to Dr. Kanuha, if you have any other mana'o, or Gail, if you have any other questions, or of course, Auntie Lynette, if you want to say anything else.
I just want to
Well,
say
you know,
aloha to Kalei. Oh, I love you.
I love you too, Auntie. Mahalo, mahalo, mahalo. Thank you for coming. I'm so glad that you're here. Really, really glad you're here. So one of the things I think that, you know, I wanted to comment on, especially because we have educators, teachers, counselors in the with us this afternoon. You know, one of the tensions, I think, for us as Hawaiians and those who work with Hawaiians and who love the Hawaiian people and our culture is how we balance, you know, the Western ways with our cultural and ancient traditions. And I think, you know, this, if you look at all 3 volumes of Nānā Kumu, what I think is really important and significant about them is, first of all, the first two volumes are literally recordings and transcripts of dialogues between Tutu Pukui and Dr. Hardig. And just that's it. It was a dialogue between a traditionally Western trained psychiatrist and a traditionally ancient scholar of Hawaiian culture. So you know the bringing together of probably the quintessential helping professional in terms of the Western way, right? Which is first of all, he was a male and he was a psychiatrist. And then you have a female who was a Hawaiian practitioner, who was a scholar. I mean, Tutukui is a scholar. She is someone who is not only well-versed in the culture, but well-versed in the expression and the representation and the presentation and the teaching of our culture, right? And that to me is what a scholar is, and that's why she was one. But you see these dialogues between Western and Hawaiian ways are reflected throughout both of the volumes. And I think the strength of Nānā Kumu, Helu ʻEkolu, is that Dennis, Richard, and Lynette, and myself, we are all trained as social workers. So we are all trained in the Western ways, but, and probably for all of them, except for me, also we're able to live what I would call not only a bicultural, but bicultural, multicultural way of life, and especially in practice, right? So because we're trying to think now, how can we apply the teachings of Nānā Kumu to the classroom today, to our community relations today, to our workplace today? Especially like these are ancient practices, like, you know, we cannot do some of these things in the classroom, but I would say you can, right? I mean, the same way I said, you know, our goal is Nānā Kumu in every household, and the practice of ho'oponopono in every family. All of the teachings in Nānā Kumu and ho'oponopono can happen in every classroom, right? And so, you know, a lot of schools now are using restorative justice as a way to resolve conflicts when children have conflicts with each other, or teachers with each other, or teachers and children, or administration, or community members, or parents in the school, or whatever. You know, a lot of schools are trying to implement a restorative justice, which primarily starts with, you know, when kids have a hakakaya. And I think, you know, what we need to do is to just kind of think about this as just a kind of a normal practice, right? That we use the principles we learn first under someone like Auntie Lynette, the practices, these Hawaiian practices that are embodied in this book, but also in the other two volumes too, but that you learn the practices under the mentorship and the teaching of a Hawaiian cultural practitioner, like somebody like Auntie. And then what it should be is something that's kind of a natural way, right, of resolving conflict. So instead of like, you're going time out, I mean, that's not a Hawaiian way. So like, just get rid of the whole timeout thing, right? What could you do instead, right? Let's sit down. Yeah, let's talk story. What happened? And so it's the incorporation, like the kamaha, the dealing of grief in an open way. I mean, that's what was talked about in Nānā Kumu, Helu, that volumes 1 and 2, and then also in Helu ʻEkolu, which is that we don't run away from our problems, right? We don't say grief is over. We don't say, oh, that loss happened and now we don't have to cry anymore. You should cry as long as you have to cry, because it's the facing of our strong emotions, the facing of our trauma towards a goal of not just crying because we're just going to keep crying, but we're doing that to release and to heal ourselves, right? And so when I think about how do we apply these with Western and Hawaiian ways, I think what the Hawaiian ways offers us is something that's a much more natural way of being. And I think any of us who live in a Hawaiian culture, whether or not you're Hawaiian, if you pay attention, you just really pay attention, you listen instead of talk, yeah? you'll see and you'll feel and you know what it is to relate that way. And to me, again, it's about aloha, right? So why would you put somebody in timeout? Timeout is, timeout is used as a punishment, and that was never, if you look, I remember I actually talked once to the person who invented the timeout concept, and I said, did you mean it to be a punishment? And he said, no, never, right? So the idea of timeout, which now I think a lot of times people use that to punish, right? And it's like, get out of my face, go time out, go in your room, whatever. It is to punish. And in a way, it is a little bit of the guilt thing. You did something bad, so I'm going to isolate you, right? Guilt is to isolate you, to be with your own self, to deal with all the bad things that you've done in your own self, right? But Ho'oponopono is it's not by yourself. We're going to start all of us together. We're going to talk together. We're not going to go our own separate ways. We're going to be in community. We're going to be in kuka together. And so the practices, when you think about, I remember when I took Ho'oponopono from Auntie Malia Craver, I would come home every day and I'd tell all my, all the social work professors at UH, I would say, you know what, I'm taking this terrific family therapy training. And they said, oh, where? And I said, well, it's Ho'oponopono. Because if you've ever taken any kind of training in family therapy or family modalities, that is what Ho'oponopono is. It's the best of that Western practice that anybody who's taken family therapy training, it's exactly what Ho'oponopono is. But it's because of the values. And the values is that you engage with each other, you're honest with each other, you come with an open heart, a healing heart, a wanting to make things right, not a wanting to punish, not a wanting to excommunicate somebody or make somebody go time out or make them go jail. That Ho'oponopono is a way of making things right in community, not making things right by sending somebody away. And so I think, to me, the best advice I would have, and this is really the melding of the best of Hawaiian culture and the best of Western teachings that really comes from, auntie, uncles, and me with them, is that what we learned is that our Hawaiian way is a way that's very authentic, it's real, it's whole, that you don't have to separate yourself. All of us who are trained in Western ways, we don't have to be embarrassed about that or be ashamed about that. We should be proud about that, because this is something that is a privilege that we have if we went to school, if we graduated high school, whatever, we're tradesperson, but that we have to love these parts of ourselves that we were gifted with. And so one of the things I always say is that, we're gifted by our ancestors to do what we're doing. And if we're not so happy doing it, or we kind of don't like doing it, I think that we shouldn't be doing it. I kind of feel it's like that simple, right? Now, of course, you got to get a job because you got to pay your bills and everything. But I do think that we have to pay close attention. We have to pule and really listen for Keakua and for our kupuna to guide us to where we're supposed to be. And as soon as I stopped trying to make everything fit how I wanted it to be, my life became so much fuller. And what was it? It led me back to my culture. And when I went back to my culture, I was able to meld, the Hawaiian ways and the Western ways. And that to me is why I see going back to our culture is the pathway. It is the pathway to healing, and it's a pathway to well-being. It's a pathway to pride. It's a pathway to self-esteem. And I think for teachers of Hawaiian children, if you kind of remember that what will heal most of our children is being proud of who they are as Hawaiians, to not be embarrassed, to not be ashamed, to not follow the stereotypes that people have about us. That is the pathway to a child who will be well, who will be cared for, who will care for you, and will care for others. And that's what we want, right? For all children, we want that. And I think the Hawaiian cultural way is the way to that end. I really believe that. And I think this book, as Auntie said, is a gift of hope and a gift of pride. And that's what we want. We want us all to be proud of who we are Hawaiian or not Hawaiian. So the last thing I want to say is that one of the things people say to me is like, you know, Kalei, you're so focused on Hawaiians and about Hawaiians. And I said, you know what? If it's good for Hawaiians, I guarantee you it's going to be good for everybody else. I don't care if you're Hawaiian or not, but if it's good for us, it will be good for everybody else. I believe that so deep in me, right? Because I've seen it happen. And that's why Hawaii is a very special place. It's because if it's good for Hawaiians, it's going to be good for everybody else. And when things don't go so good in Hawaii, it's because whoever is doing whatever they're doing have gone away from those ancient practices that live in the land, that live in the ocean, that live in our animals, that live in the soil. And if we go away from those things, then things are not going to go so good. We're not going to be so very healthy, right? So that's the hope that I believe this book offers us, to be proud of who we are and to live always in aloha.
Mahalo, Dr. Kanuha. We literally have about 6 minutes. And I know Gail has an announcement to make before we go, but there was one, I don't know if you can answer this quickly because this is kind of but I had the same question too about spirituality. You know, like I mentioned, Gail and I do go into the public school classrooms. People are a little hesitant about Ho'oponopono because of the protocols that include pule, or that we talk about spirituality. And so Dr. Allison, is it Bays, said, you know, what about the impact of spirituality? Western practices focus on physical, mental, emotional components for healing and harmony and wholeness. Native traditions have culture, which includes ceremony and spirituality as a key component. Would you mind talking a little bit about that? Because I agree with what you're saying. If it's good for Hawaii, it's good for all. I think that just makes sense. But you know, if we do teach in a place where, like, how do you categorize spirituality, or yeah, we can talk about that a little bit.
Well, you know, again, I think if you look at Helu ʻEkolu in particular, but some of, you know, the other writings of Tutu Pukui, she suggests this too, which is the embracing of Hawaiian culture doesn't mean the rejection of Western ways, right? And that's the point. I think is a real strength of these gifts of Nānā Kumu, volumes 1 to 3. But one of the things that Auntie Lynette said, and I think you'll see it in this volume too, is we say that the embracing of, the remembrance of, the centralizing of spirituality in a Hawaiian context is not a rejection of Western religion, that actually they can live and they can practice together. But it's not the Hawaiian side that says don't practice Western religion. It's Western religion that's telling us don't practice a Hawaiian side, right? So we're not, this is very clear. I think there's a part of the book that we say, one does not reject the other. We as Hawaiians can be spiritual people and can practice spiritual protocols. It doesn't mean you're not supposed to go to church. It doesn't mean you're not supposed to believe in a Christian God or the Holy Spirit, as exemplified in Jesus Christ, or any other, you know, in any other religious practice. But yeah, I think what colonization has done is it taught us that somehow Western religion is more important than Hawaiian spirituality. And so to me, I don't see a conflict. I can see in a Western classroom, the protocols look like they are, you know, that they are religious, but I think we have to remember spirituality is not the same thing as religion. It's not the same thing as religion, right? And so everyone has a spirit. I mean, we all have a spirit, but we don't all have a religion, but we all have a spirit. And so some of these protocols that, I mean, I've worked with many people. It's like, well, I'm not going to do that Ho'oponopono stuff because that's hocus pocus kind things, right? And it goes against religion. I can see where people say that, but that is not the intent. That's never been the intent, and it's not the intent of any of these volumes. It's the melding together what's best for us to love fully and to care for each other in the best way. And caring for each other doesn't mean we reject somebody who believes in a more religious context. And it doesn't mean that if you practice a religion that you don't have a spirit or you don't have spirituality. So I don't see that there should be a conflict. It might, so either it's not being taught correctly, or there's a rigidity about how some of these practices are being implemented in a classroom or in a therapy office. But I don't see a conflict about that. I don't know if Auntie wants to say. I know we're almost at time, but Auntie,
Yeah.
you want to say something about that?
Yeah, you go ahead, Auntie.
Spiritualism is not the same as institutionalized religion. I look at it as spiritual forces outside of myself, spiritual forces from within myself, and that is my genealogy. We have had within my genealogy experiences where we encounter deceased, the uhani of deceased relatives. Some of us have had these experiences through a dream, through smelling a fragrance that is out of context to the surrounding. Some of us have had connections by hearing words and conversation. And Tutu gave us a perfect understanding. Beloved relatives that come from within yourself never come to harm or to cause death. They appear out of love and they have a message. The message is something is happening in your life. What are you going to do about it? Yeah. So the aumakua has been an important factor of my life. I've always respected, but for a long time, I didn't know the aumakua in my genealogical line. Keep those assets that are positive and can help you navigate life today. So, from your genealogical connection, Tutu says they're there to help. They come out of love. What we lost was how to interpret these experiences. And in a course I teach at West Oahu, hey, a full 2 hours, we can talk about personal experiences and how it has helped to shape people's lives once they get the interpretation. The intention of that visitation of spiritual presence is what we got disconnected from. And so this class, which is free to the public, was conceived of to recognize not only Hawaiians have that kind of experience. Go back to your indigenous source and you will find that many people across the globe have this, but we never knew how to deal with it. Yeah. And I say, best practice with evidence is good, but it's not the only way. Even scientists are befuddled with spirituality, and that they cannot deny the outcome. When someone who's in a coma can't come out of the coma, but spiritualism and puli. And the words of the aumakua that come to guide you in a solution process revives that person, and they open their eyes. So spiritualism, whether it's outside or from within you, I see it as positive factors. They're assets. We just have to learn how to interpret what that message is. It works, gang. Yeah.
Mahalo, Auntie. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's so beautiful. All right, guys. Thank you, everyone. Kako, for being here, particularly for Dr. Kanuha. Thank you, Anake, for coming in and also, giving us your ike. Again, my name is Bella Finau Famuina. I'm a resource teacher here at the windward side of Oahu. And so if you need anything through Compassionate Ko'olaupoko, you can contact us, and I'll turn it over to my partner, Dr. Gil.
Oh, mahalo, Bella. Mahalo, everyone, for being here. We appreciated all of the voices. I know this was, to me, a brave conversation and so needed. As I know for me, as I read Nānā ʻEkolu, it takes me so much time to digest it. It's not a fast read. It's one of those things that you just want to sit and read and reflect and journal. And so we were wondering, Dr. Kanuha and I were wondering if others wanted to continue a conversation. Some people have requested this. So we're wondering, is that still okay, Dr. Kanuha? Is that okay with you? Yeah.
Yeah, that would be so great, so wonderful.
Yeah, so maybe we'll talk some more. If maybe if you want to just put something in the chat, yes, that sounds good. I would love to participate.
Yeah,
We can kind of get a
having
read.
guesses.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm seeing heads nodding. This might be nice to
Hearts.
continue this conversation.
Yeah,
Yes,
they're
please.
saying yes, please.
Okay. So we'll talk with Dr. Kanuha more, and then we will email everyone to let you know. So just watch for emails, and we'll let you know when the next one is. But thank you all so much, Dr. Kanuha. We cannot thank you enough. Auntie Lynette, what a beautiful surprise.
Thank you, Auntie, for coming.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Mahalo, everybody. Mahalo.
Mahalo, everyone. And again, the recording will be up online soon, so look out for that if you want to rewatch it again. I will be in contact. Mahalo again for coming.
Have a
Aloha.
nice